Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Tough Friends Collective podcast. I am your host, Chelsea Gomez, also known as Oh, You're So Tough. Welcome back. If you're just joining us for the first time, just wanted to give you a brief overview of what you can expect. This podcast is all about cancer in real, authentic, candid ways. We discuss the good, the bad, the in-between, all the things. And if you like this podcast, I invite you to please leave some stars, some good reviews. It really does help me out a bunch. Today's topic is one that was probably one of the most upsetting experiences that I went through during cancer. So I just wanted to give a slight trigger warning that we are going to be talking about being ghosted during cancer, also known as when people just basically stop talking to you or stop being your friend, or even sometimes it's your family who just kind of abandon you simply because you got diagnosed with cancer. We're going to be talking a little bit about why it happens, the fact that it is very normal, what you can do about it, to kind of cope with it, and hear some of the stories that I have pulled from my community on Instagram, which is under my name, Oh, You're So Tough. First of all, I just want to say that, yes, like I just mentioned, I have been through this same experience when I was sick. I noticed it when I went through my first cancer experience, and a lot also when I went through my relapse. I think the longer that you are sick, or if you have a relapse, or maybe you have chronic or metastatic cancer, I've said this before, but I think the longer that you are sick, the less people have space in their life for you. And that is a sad reality, and it shouldn't be that way. But I just want to tell you that if you are going through this, you aren't alone. And so I remember being in the middle of chemotherapy, in the middle of just all these awful things that come along with cancer, and just asking myself, like, am I a terrible person? Like, why would this person or these people just stop checking in on me? Why would they stop texting me? Why would they stop inviting me to things? Why would they abandon me simply because I was sick? Like, was this their chance to run away and have an excuse? Or I'm not really sure. And really, in this conversation, I'm not going to be telling you that a reason is justified or not. Or, I'll give you my opinion, but this is more a larger conversation about what happens in the science, not science, but the why behind it. In a way, it's not always going to fit perfectly into these boxes, and you might not agree with everything I say, and that is okay. But I think it's important that we have these conversations because, like I said, I felt very alone when this happened to me, and it was very painful. And I remember that's probably one of the first things I shared, like on Instagram, well, early on, just like, hey, does anyone else get ghosted by their friends simply because they were sick? And I think I may have even made a YouTube video about this back when I was in treatment. And it just wasn't something that was talked about a lot. So that's why this podcast, I think, is important, where we can talk about these things. And even though the conversations are not easy to have, it's something that we do need to talk about because it happens. And so it's better when a bad thing happens, you're not alone in it. Doesn't make it okay or excuse it. But yeah, I just wanted to slightly give that little disclaimer because I have some feelings about this topic. So we're going to get into it. I want to read a submission from my community. The first one I want to read is it's more of a general statement, but I think it's a good way to get into talking about why this happens. So this person says, friends ghosting and betraying you and having pressure from your loved ones is the worst, or are the worst feelings. And yes, I agree. The first most common reason I have heard or experienced or seen as to why a person would ghost someone, we're just going to use ghost, is abandoning them, whatever, but we're going to say ghost you, is because they are scared. They don't know what to expect. They're scared of cancer itself. They're scared of seeing you like that. They're scared of looking in the mirror at themselves, like especially when you're a young person going through cancer. I think people are looking at you like, oh no, I don't want that to happen to me. Like, I would rather put my head into the sand and pretend like this sort of thing isn't happening or can't happen to me. And so it's easier to just pretend. And while I understand that coping mechanism, because I have leaned into that coping mechanism with certain things in my life, like, hey, la 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 di pretend like it don't exist. I don't know that that's the best way to go through life. In fact, I know it's not. It's better to have your wits about you and not just pretend like you're invincible, everything's great. Like, that's why listening to your body and knowing symptoms and getting tests and all of that stuff is so important. But I think when you're young, especially, you think, oh, it couldn't happen to me. It's not going to happen to me. And a lot of times these people see us and are just like scared of the what ifs, not only for what if, like what could happen to you personally if they care about you, but also what could happen to them. And yeah, that's just, I while I get it, I find that to be pretty selfish, especially if it's a close friend of yours or a family member, to just kind of put them on the side so you can protect yourself because you want to pretend like it could never happen to you or isn't happening. I'm not a fan of that, but that is one of the most common things that I have heard. In fact, there is a story that I always remember from my page where somebody's own mother basically ghosted them the entire time they were in treatment. And after they finished treatment, the mother basically came back and said, oh, well, it's because I couldn't just, watch you die, essentially. Obviously, this person did not die, thank goodness. But I don't know. I just can't. Being a parent myself, can't imagine that. Like, nobody wants to see their child sick no matter their age. But I just couldn't imagine just being like, because I didn't want to watch you be sick, I didn't want to be around you. Like, so if this person did have the alternative outcome, then you would have just not even had an interaction with them for the last 6, 12, however many months. I don't know. I'm not a fan of that, but that is a very common reason or excuse that I do see given. The next one is people get uncomfortable with not knowing what to say to someone. So we talk a lot about on my page, especially in this podcast, I'm sure we talked about it because it comes up a lot, like what to say to people and what not to say to people. The whole, you got this, everything happens for a reason, etc. Those aren't maybe the most helpful thing you can say to people. And I think people get into like indecision paralysis or is it decision paralysis? One of those. But they're like, I don't know what to say, so I'm just gonna say anything. Well, I will always tell you, no matter how much I talk about say this, don't say that, blah, 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 saying nothing to someone who is going through something like cancer is one of like the most painful things you could do. It would be better if you said the wrong thing rather than nothing. Now, there's limits to that. It's not like, oh, girl, you'll be fine. Like, I don't know. There are obvious things I would rather you not say, but the silence, it just speaks volumes, and it's not in a good way. Along those lines, there is an org I want to mention. It's called Be Present Org, and their big focus right now is being present with the person, not perfect. And I think that is perfect. Too many perfects. I think that is a perfect sentiment regarding this topic around not knowing what to say and then therefore you say nothing. Being present, not perfect. Nobody expects you to be perfect, especially when someone first gets diagnosed with cancer. They don't know what to expect. Like, I didn't know what to expect. I was very different in the way I coped with my cancer in the beginning versus like as we went on with time. Like, I was very much, we got this, we're gonna Chelsea's Unicorn Army, blah, blah, blah. I'm brave, all that. Now, I didn't know it was okay to not be that person or play that role. And now I know that it is okay to be authentic and say that, this sucks. But yeah, I think that you're really learning when you first get sick what it's all about, what you do and don't like, as far as like terms and emotions. And I can understand that it is overwhelming for the person on the outside wanting to support you, not knowing what to do. And Be Present has put a lot of time and energy into like actually researching this topic. So if you're interested in it, I recommend you go to their website, and I'll link the website below. I worked with them on a project where it's like these support boxes, and they send one to the patient and one to the support person, and it has tips for both people, like tips on things you can do, what you should say, what you maybe shouldn't say. For that project, I actually went to my community and asked, what would you say to people when they're first diagnosed? What is advice you have? And kind of help them curate the letter that goes out to people in those boxes on both sides, because I think it's important to have the patient perspective in these sorts of materials, especially people who are going through it or have gone through it. Because, like I said, when you're in the beginning of something, you don't really know what you want, what you don't like. And so I think it's great that they're doing that. So I just wanted to give them a shout out and say that if you are interested in learning more or reading those documents, or maybe you want to share them with someone, I think that it's all on their website. So I'll link that in the description of the show. The next reason that some people kind of just disappear from your life is they might have a personal connection with cancer that is being triggered by your situation. It's not your fault. And honestly, I probably understand that one the most closely, just being obviously somebody who had cancer, is that when cancer is brought up, it can be extremely triggering in many different ways. And especially if you had somebody pass away that was close to you, or you personally went through it, I can understand that, maybe you just don't have space in your life to cope with cancer again. Now, I think that you should explain that to the person who is ill, especially if you have a close relationship with them. Don't just disappear with no explanation. That is one thing that happened to me. It's like a couple people just disappeared without explanation. So I was left to fill in the blanks. And clearly, like I told you earlier, it was like, oh, I guess I must be terrible. They must hate me, etc. I really don't know what the situation was, even with those people today. But if they had told me like, hey, I'm really sorry, I don't have space in my life because I've had this experience and it just really is upsetting. And I'm not saying I would like that answer. Nobody really would. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, okay. But I would understand it. I don't know if, and I don't know if I would understand it when I first got sick. I really don't. I really like to be honest with you here. I don't have all the answers and I don't have it all figured out because cancer is confusing and there's so many nuances with it. But I would respect somebody more in the long run if they had a genuine conversation with me about why it was upsetting or why they couldn't show up like they wanted to. And I think most of us feel that way. It's like I said, it's worse when it's just cricket silence. We are left to just fill in the blanks. And like I said, most of us here in the cancer community, I know, like to, our brains like to go spinning with like all these, thoughts and feels and all that. And so I would much rather have that conversation, even if it's a difficult conversation. So I'm not left sitting here being like, oh, it's clearly because you hate me. You know what I mean? The next submission I'm going to read, it really ties in, I think, with the next kind of reasoning. And this submission says, my supposedly best friend has been awful during my cancer journey. I finally reached my limit of her hurting me and set boundaries for my mental health. She posted on Facebook, I should be thankful I am alive. I've never experienced unkindness like this in my life for just having cancer. The next one I was going to discuss is being overwhelmed with their own lives, which I think this submission about the best friend just being just awful during it and not really showing up like this person expected. I think that sometimes people feel like, oh, I have too much going on in my own life, so I don't have time for that. I don't have space for it, blah, blah, blah. And I personally, I'm one of those people that's extremely loyal to friends and family. So I couldn't imagine just being like, oh yeah, I got too much going on. So But yes, there are people, and I'm not saying it's not valid that people have a lot going on in their life. It's just, it seems to be in so many scenarios that it's like the closest people to you are the ones that do this. And I don't really understand it. So many of us have seen where people who we would never expect to step up are the ones that actually step up and are there for us. Like a random friend you had a couple years ago, or a coworker you don't talk to that much. Those people start stepping in and becoming your true support system more than the close people that you, like if I were to ask you the day before you got cancer, if you need somebody, who would you name? And you would say, let's say these 3 people. A lot of times those 3 people, or at least 2 out of the 3, are these ghosts. They're the ones who are doing these things to you. And it really sucks. It just plain out sucks. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And it's so surprising that this experience happens to people of all ages, people all around the world, people in so many different scenarios. It happens, and it's crazy that this is like a universal experience. Like I remember making a bingo card for cancer once, and I think even like being ghosted by a cancer muggle was on it, because it is that universal. And I think that's why so many of us now, we have so many cancer friends versus like the people who were in our life before cancer. A lot of times I've heard from people like, hey, I don't even really, like for me too, I don't really even talk to those people who were here before I got sick. The people I have in my side and my support system, like my best friend is a cancer patient that we met through Instagram. That speaks volumes to me, especially seeing that like all these other people, where are you? You're back at the Haunted Mansion. I think it's also important to tell yourself that when these things happen, it isn't your fault. It isn't about you, really. All these sorts of like reasons that we go over are more about that person. It doesn't help it hurt any less. It doesn't make it any easier to cope with or live with or deal with. Even now, I'm like coming up on my 6-year cancerversary of my original diagnosis. And it's still, when I think back on these situations, it still hurts. But I have told myself, and I've realized that it has so much more to do with that human than it has to do with me. I didn't do anything wrong. I just got sick. You didn't do anything wrong. You just got sick. And some people's emotional maturity to deal with these sorts of situations is really good and great, or people are willing to learn. Just like I explained, like those kids earlier, they're willing to read those things and ask questions. And I have people who follow me on Instagram who have friends and family who have even reached out to me like, hey, my sister's going through this, or my best friend's going through this. What do you recommend? I think those people are so invaluable in your life, but not everybody is like that. And that's just the reality. And sometimes, well, not sometimes, I'd say always, cancer shows people's true colors in your life. And it's extremely eye-opening to see, who's there in the beginning and who ends up being there at the end or throughout your treatment, especially like I mentioned, people who are on consistent treatment for the rest of their lives. These people need the solid support people in their lives. And it's really just sad that it's like, well, I just don't have space for that anymore. It's like you're just telling me you don't have space for me anymore, I guess. And it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. And if you have gone through that and you're listening, I just want you to know, once again, you're not alone. And there are people out here that love you, and you can find your people. You can find, new friends, cancer friends that understand. And yeah, it's not you, it's them. We touched on this briefly, but I want to reiterate that ghosting is not just friends, it's family too. And I think that when it's family, it's an even deeper level of like heartbreak. Because you think, friends can be like family, but friends can be fickle in many ways. I mean, not always. People have lifelong friends, but I've seen where lifelong friends are even the same. But I think when it's family, especially, you think your family is like ride or die. You know what I mean? Like, I will be there with you. I will be at chemo with you. I will sit by your side. I'll do everything. But when the family members are the ones that are not there for you, it's like an even bigger slap in the face is the only way I can put it. So I want to read this submission as one of the last submissions I'll read today. And it says, my leukemia relapsed last year in November, and I'm in remission now. My uncle had the audacity to think 2 phone calls to my mom at the beginning was enough to know if I was okay. Never tried to contact me recently or see how everything was going. That story obviously illustrates, when you have this family member and it's like 2 calls in the beginning, that it's just very upsetting. It's like, I would not act that way. It's very hard to understand how other people go through life doing things like this when like you would never do that. You would never be that person to abandon someone going through cancer. You would never be that person not to check on your family member. You would never be that person. So it's hard to understand how people are like that. I had a family member, I'm not going to go into who it was, what they did exactly, but I did have a family member who I expected to check in on me more, and it really hurt my feelings. It was like I feel like I didn't hear from them much. Like I heard from them like once in a blue moon during like this 2.5-year period of going through all of this. And, this said family member would ask another family member about how I was doing apparently, but they never asked me. And I remember telling this family member maybe like a year ago how it hurt my feelings and how I was upset by it. And, they apologized and all of that. But I mean, even me, it happens, and it's hard to deal with. I mean, I think that going to therapy has helped me understand more that, like I told you, that it's more about that person than it is about me. It doesn't reflect my worth as a person. It doesn't mean that I know this person loves me and I love them, but that hurt, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get rid of that hurt in my heart from that situation, especially it being somebody in my family that I love and I have been there for their whole life, basically. Let's talk about now, what are some ways that we can cope with this ghosting? And there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Like I just mentioned, therapy is a great way to go in and really understand not only why these things are happening, but maybe, looking at the other person objectively from another person's perspective, what they might be thinking, because people are flawed human beings. We all are. And so really understanding that more and taking less of the burden off of you as to like what you did wrong is really helpful. Surrounding yourself with people and friends that love you, as I mentioned, cancer friends, I think are truly invaluable to getting through this. I have a series on my Instagram account called Tough Friends Friday, where I post like people who are looking for friends. And I just started that, it might be like 3 years ago, when I saw people who, should be friends. They would be in my DMs and I would see they had similar interests. And so many people have met through that. And I think it's so special because just having one good cancer friend who you don't really have to explain all these things to, they just get it, that is worth its weight in gold, honestly. And so if you can put yourself out there to meet people who are in this community, I highly encourage you to. And you can do things like, you can come to my page, submit that. There's also an organization called Immerman Angels. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Immerman Angels basically matches you with somebody for a mentorship/friendship. It's a lot more formal than mine. Mine is just, on Instagram. But if you'd like a more formal setting to do that, I would highly recommend Immerman Angels for that service. Even if you're not looking to connect one-on-one with someone and do all that, I think that finding these communities, like, I'm not the biggest fan of Facebook groups. I'll just be honest. I think a lot of times the Facebook groups for cancer can be a little bit triggering or upsetting a lot of times. You really just have to, you do you. If you find comfort there, that is perfectly fine. I know for me, I basically left all the groups except for maybe one, and I don't spend a lot of time in that group at all because it's just, at a certain point, it just becomes like I'm doom scrolling in those sorts of places. So going on to like Instagram or wherever you find your community, even like a local organization or your hospital sometimes has support groups. I think that once you find your people, and these people are new people, of course, once you find those people, the world just starts making sense again. At least that's how it was for me. Another thing you can do in regards to coping with this sort of thing is sharing about it. And you don't have to share about it like me blabbing on the internet. You can share it with your partner if you have one, a close confidant, whether, depending on who it's about, you can kind of talk to a close friend or a close family member, depending on the situation. But I think not living in the shadows with this situation, it does make a difference, because when you're living in the shadows and kind of feeling ashamed of yourself and not talking about this, then I think that's when it feels the worst. It's like a secret, and it's a secret that is painful and it's embarrassing, and it can feel like you have a lot of shame connected with this sort of thing, but you shouldn't, because it's not your fault. And so talking about it, maybe even sharing privately if you write it down or you make some art or whatever helps you, I think that can really make a difference, and not help it to be okay, but to help it feel more okay, if hopefully that makes sense. The last sort of way that I think it's helpful to deal with this is to learn how to set boundaries. I think that is something that is going to come up again and again when we talk on these podcasts, is setting boundaries. Setting boundaries is very hard, especially for someone like me. I've mentioned this before, a recovering people pleaser. So me telling somebody no, or not responding to them, or not giving them what they're asking me for, or letting them in the same way, it's hard. It feels like you're doing something wrong. It feels like you're being mean sometimes, but it's truly not. It's being very kind to yourself. Boundaries are so important, and it means boundaries not only with friends, but with family. Like, example, this person with the uncle we just talked about, it's okay if they put boundaries in, like, hey, I don't want to talk to you for a while, or I don't feel comfortable being around you right now. That is okay, and that is valid. You make the decisions, especially going through cancer. Sorry, it's time for you to put yourself first. If you never have before, or you hardly do it, please put yourself first with cancer, because there's so much going on, so much you're dealing with, so many things coming at you at once, all these situations, all these unknowns, all of this crap, that you really need to learn pretty early on how to set boundaries and to not share things you don't want to share with people you don't want to share them with. Keep things to yourself. Know that that's okay. And yeah, if people don't like it, show them the door. I mean, that's just the reality. It sucks. It's hard. It's scary. I still need help. I still trying to practice that. But I think that it's something that we need to do, especially going through something like cancer. You have to get good at it. And I personally, once again, I think therapy has helped me a lot. So I'm a big, big, big fan of therapy. If you can do it, I know it's not always accessible to everyone, but even like at your hospital, there's oncology social workers you can speak to. You can ask for help, and they can just give you some strategies on feeling okay when you do set boundaries, or understanding exactly what we're talking about on this podcast, all these different issues as to why they happen and what you can do about them. I think that is really, really helpful. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps up our episode about cancer ghosting. I would, of course, welcome your thoughts if you have any comments or you want to share with me on Instagram, or if you are interested in submitting a story that would be shared either on my Instagram or through the podcast. I have a Google form that is in my link tree where you can anonymously, well, it's not anonymous to me, but it's anonymous to the rest of the world, submit your stories or your thoughts. I would, I welcome those. Once again, just a last reminder that this isn't your fault. It's okay to set boundaries. This happens to almost everyone. It's not about you, it's them. And it's okay to admit that it's painful, it sucks, it's BS. It's also okay to say that it's BS and it hurts, even when you can put yourself in the other person's shoes and maybe understand why these things are happening. But still, it's okay to be like, yeah, while I understand that, it still hurts. And yeah. So I am sending everyone who needs one a big hug at the end of this episode. I'll take one too. Hugs. And I will be back with another episode soon. Like I said in the beginning, if you enjoy this podcast, please give me a nice rating and follow me on all the things. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, y'all.